Picture this. A torch flickers in the silence of an ancient tomb. The air is heavy with resin, smoke, and the perfume of death. At the center lies a king's body, wrapped in gold and linen, his face painted for eternity. But the tomb is not meant for him alone. At his side kneels a woman, his queen. Her wrists are bound in silk, her eyes wide with terror. Priests chant low hymns, their voices echoing like stones falling into water. She is still alive. Her fate is sealed, not by her sins or choices, but by a ritual older than memory itself, to follow her husband into the afterlife, even if it means her own slow suffocation in the dark. The stone door grinds shut, the last light of the world vanishes, and in that silence, history buries not just a queen, but the truth. Because across centuries, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from India to China, kings demanded more than loyalty in life. They demanded loyalty in death. Queens, concubines, and wives were sacrificed, buried alive, burned, or silenced forever, so that a man's power would echo even in eternity. Tonight, we open the tombs. Tonight, we uncover the most horrifying ritual history tried to disguise as devotion. Why were some queens buried alive with their kings? And what does it reveal about the darkest hunger for power? The ground remembers what the living try to forget. For centuries, archaeologists have dug into deserts, jungles, and river valleys, searching for treasure. But what they found was not just gold. They found bones. Bones that told stories the chroniclers refused to write. In Mesopotamia, the land of the first kings, royal tombs were uncovered that shocked even hardened scientists. Buried alongside kings were rows of women, queens, concubines, and attendants. Their jewelry still glittered, their skulls still bore traces of elaborate crowns, their bodies arranged with eerie perfection. At first, scholars believed these women had volunteered, that perhaps they had drunk a potion, a peaceful poison, a ritual of devotion to follow their king into eternity. But when the bones were examined more closely, the truth was darker. Cracks in the skulls, blunt force trauma. They had not gone willingly. They had been silenced. In Egypt, the whispers were no different. The pharaoh was not a man, but a god, and a god could not enter the afterlife alone. In the tomb of Pharaoh Aha, one of Egypt's earliest rulers, excavators found dozens of bodies buried with him. Some were servants, but among them was his queen. Her remains were not mummified with the care given to kings. She was buried quickly, as if her life had been ripped away to suit someone else's eternity. The pattern stretched far beyond the Nile. In the Indus Valley, in ancient India, and even in the steppes of China, evidence of queens buried alive with kings appeared again and again. Sometimes they were placed in chambers decorated with silk and ivory. Sometimes their bodies were hidden beneath the king's coffin, like shadows under his throne. And each time the message was the same. The king's power did not end at death. It reached into the grave, demanding wives, concubines, even children as offerings. The silence of these tombs is deafening. Archaeologists kneel in the dust, their lamps flickering against walls painted with scenes of eternity, and they know these women were not remembered for who they were. They were remembered only as extensions of a man. Queens who laughed, mothers who dreamed, women who once walked in gardens under sunlight, reduced to bones beneath stone. And yet those bones whisper. They tell us that love was never the reason. Power was. Because to bury a queen alive with her king was not about devotion, it was about control. Control that stretched beyond life itself. For centuries, kings and priests wrapped horror in the language of beauty. They told their people that when a queen went to the grave with her husband, it was devotion, the highest act of loyalty, a love so pure it conquered death itself. But history, when stripped of poetry, shows something far more brutal. In Sumer, the first civilization, court poets wrote of beloved wives who chose eternity. Yet the archaeological record betrays the lie. In the royal cemetery of Ur,
excavators uncovered a chilling scene. Dozens of women laid neatly in rows, cups still beside their lips. For decades, scholars believed they had drunk a sacred potion, a peaceful sleep. But CT scans of their skulls revealed the fractures. They had been struck down before being arranged like dolls. This illusion of devotion was repeated across empires. In India, the ritual of sati would one day carry the same mask, the idea that a wife willingly cast herself into her husband's funeral pyre. Chroniclers described it as noble, sacred, honorable. But behind the flames were screams. Behind the chants were women pushed, tied, drugged. Few went willingly. Most were trapped in an illusion crafted by men who feared female independence more than fire itself. Even in China's Song dynasty, concubines were buried alive beside their lords. The chronicles called them companions in eternity. Yet their bodies, unearthed centuries later, bore the frozen terror of people who had not asked to die. The lie of devotion served a purpose. It soothed the living. It painted the king as a man so loved that even death could not separate him from his wives. But in reality, it erased the truth. These women had no choice. Their love was rewritten into obedience. Their suffering was masked as loyalty. And the illusion was powerful. To the people, it was ceremony. To the priests, it was order. To the king, it was immortality. But to the queens, it was a trap. Because behind every voluntary sacrifice was a command. Behind every sacred ritual was a whispered threat. And behind every illusion of devotion was a body, silenced, buried beneath the weight of a man's eternity.
The ancient world believed kings were not just rulers, they were bridges between heaven and earth. And when they died, they could not cross into eternity alone. They needed companions, offerings, shadows to follow them into the dark. And who better to follow than their queens? In Mesopotamia, royal tombs tell this story with silent precision. Archaeologists uncovered queens buried beside their husbands, surrounded by attendants frozen in obedience. But closer study revealed the horror. Skulls caved in by blunt force, bodies arranged like decorations. These were not companions, they were sacrifices. In Egypt, the illusion ran deeper. Pharaohs were gods, and their wives were expected to serve them even beyond death. Some queens were entombed alive, their screams muffled by sand and stone, sealed forever beside golden sarcophagi. The hieroglyphs on the walls spoke of eternal unions, but the truth is clear. Eternity was built on suffering. The Mongol Khans carried this practice into the steppes. When a great Khan died, his wives and concubines were strangled and buried with him, their jewelry still glittering on lifeless bodies. Chronicles described it as loyalty, but the silence of the earth told another story, one of women turned into offerings against their will. Even in the Ottoman Empire, whispers spoke of women buried with sultans in elaborate mausoleums. Official records praised devoted wives. Yet rumors told of concubines who vanished the night a ruler died, their bodies never seen again, their names erased from history. The belief was always the same: a king's power must not end with death. His queens, his women, his treasures, all were chained to him, even in the grave. But here lies the chilling truth. These women were not offerings. They were stolen futures. For them, the afterlife was not devotion. It was captivity, extended beyond the grave.
Imagine the funeral of a king. Drums echo through the capital, smoke rises from incense, and thousands watch as gold and jewels are carried to his tomb. But among the treasures there are human shadows, his queens, trembling behind veils. They are told it is honor, that following their king into the afterlife makes them immortal. But they know the truth. The afterlife will be a tomb of fire and stone. In India, the practice of sati forced queens and wives to climb funeral pyres alive. Before crowds, they were draped in red silk, jewels glittering, their faces painted with sacred ash. Priests sang hymns while flames were lit. To the onlookers, it was a ceremony of loyalty. To the women, it was slow death by fire. In Scythian burials on the Eurasian steppe, queens were placed beside their dead husbands in great burial mounds. Archaeologists found strangled bodies, women still wearing golden crowns, their mouths open in silent screams. The earth was their coffin, and loyalty was their curse. In China, chronicles spoke of rulers demanding their consorts drink poison during imperial funerals. Their deaths were renamed sacrifice, but behind the veils of silk were faces twisted in terror. Fire, stone, poison, strangulation. The methods differed, but the belief was the same. Kings could not face eternity alone, and queens had no choice but to follow. The horror lay not only in death, but in its disguise. What the world called sacred ritual was, in truth, murder painted as devotion. And every flame that burned, every stone that sealed a tomb, was proof that power did not end at death. It consumed even the living.
The king's funeral did not end when the body was lowered into stone. For his queens, it had only begun. The tombs were vast, carved into mountains or built as golden pyramids, but behind the splendor, they were cages of silence. Inside, the queens were locked with food, water, and a promise: "You will join him soon." In ancient Ur, archaeologists found royal graves filled not only with treasures, but with bodies of women, queens, and servants, lying in neat rows, golden cups still clutched in their hands. They had been given a drink of loyalty, poisoned wine that stilled their breath forever. In Egypt, paintings show wives walking calmly into chambers, adorned in linen and jewels, their faces serene. But serenity was a mask. The doors slammed shut, the air grew thin, and the stone remembered their screams. In Mongol burials, whispers spoke of queens buried alive with warriors, their cries muffled beneath earth, their bodies pressed into the cold embrace of soil. The living became eternal ornaments of the dead. The silence of the tombs was not peace, it was suffocation. The queens were not companions, they were offerings. Their bodies placed beside kings to prove loyalty, their deaths twisted into spectacle. What outsiders called sacred burial was in truth execution by silence. The tomb became both grave and prison. And the most chilling truth? When explorers opened these tombs centuries later, the treasures glittered still. But among the jewels, the skeletons of queens lay folded in terror, proof that power devours even love, even life, even after death.
No king ever admitted cruelty. No priest ever confessed to evil. Every act, no matter how grotesque, was wrapped in the veil of justification. When queens were buried alive, their deaths were called loyalty. When concubines were silenced in silk sacks, it was called justice. When entire chambers of women disappeared overnight, the scribes wrote, "The gods have chosen." The Ottomans called it mercy, for to be drowned in silk was purer than to spill royal blood. The Egyptians called it sacred duty, for a queen who followed her husband into death was said to join him in eternity. The Mongols said it was honor, for a ruler should not face the afterlife alone. But the truth? These justifications were nothing more than masks for fear. Fear of women who knew too much. Fear of queens whose sons might claim the throne. Fear of whispers that could unravel dynasties. The harem was never just a sanctuary of beauty. It was a laboratory of obedience. The women were told stories until they believed them, that suffering was holy, that silence was strength, that death in silk was more noble than life in chains. But behind every justification lay the same reality: power devouring the powerless. To the world outside, the palaces shone with gold, but inside, blood soaked into marble, and scribes, too afraid to tell the truth, dipped their pens in lies instead.
For centuries, rulers believed their justifications would last forever, that the silks, the rituals, the ceremonies of death would disguise the cruelty beneath. But illusions always break, and when they did, they shattered like glass, cutting everyone, even those who had once held the power. The tombs tell the story. Archaeologists opening royal graves in Egypt found wives buried alive beside their pharaohs, their bones twisted, their mouths frozen mid-scream. The chronicles of the Ottomans speak in whispers of concubines lost to the waters, their silken shrouds never found. The Mongol steppe still echoes with tales of slaves slaughtered so their masters would not walk alone in the afterlife. These were not noble deaths. They were murders dressed as tradition, and the people began to see. Whispers spread through bazaars, through markets, through caravan trails. If a queen is not safe, who is safe? Trust crumbled. Faith decayed. Dynasties that seemed immortal began to rot from the inside. Because cruelty is a debt that always comes due. The pharaohs fell, the Ottomans weakened, the Mongols shattered, and in their ruins, one truth rose like smoke. No empire built on silenced women, buried queens, and drowned concubines can last. The palaces still stand. Their stones glitter under sun and moon. Tourists walk their halls, cameras flashing where screams once echoed. But beneath the marble, beneath the silk, beneath the golden domes, the shadows still whisper. Whispers of queens buried alive. Whispers of power feeding on love. Whispers of history's most horrifying acts, dressed as loyalty, remembered as shame. The chronicles of kings speak of crowns and conquests. But beneath every crown, there were shadows. And in those shadows, queens wept, concubines prayed, and history buried its sins alive. The rulers believed their power was eternal, that silks, rituals, and sacred lies could disguise cruelty. But stone remembers, water remembers, and whispers never die. What does this teach us? That power often disguises cruelty as ceremony. That chains can be hidden under silk. That suffering can be rewritten as sacred duty. But history refuses to forget, and neither should we. If this story left you unsettled, good, it should, because history's darkest truths are not fairy tales, they are warnings. If you want to uncover more of these forbidden chapters, more secrets buried in time, then join me. Subscribe to Secrets Buried in Time. Together, we will keep lifting the veils that empires tried to keep shut forever. Because the shadows of history are not silent. They are still speaking, and it is up to us to listen.